Yes, another glorious day where you guys get to hear from voices that are not my own. Welcome, everybody, to another Buy Low. I stopped myself. I almost said Buy High, Sell Low. Buy Low, Sell High edition of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm your host, Dan Bespris, and we got double the Dans on today's episode. Dan Titus of Yahoo Sports will be on with us in a matter of seconds to give you 4 of his favorite trade-related targets. Make sure to hit that like button as you're settling in. Subscribe to the channel. Drop a 5-star review. And I'll tell you about the rest of the crap while we're motoring our way through. First and foremost, fellow Dan, good day to you, sir. It's nice to have you back on the show.
Double dose of Dan. What's up, Dan? Good to see you, man. How you been?
I don't know, like lightly functional. Is that good?
You didn't recharge the batteries after Thanksgiving, man? Come on.
Oh,
now.
my God. Thanksgiving is the ultimate in battery depletion over here on the Best side. We do 3 Thanksgivings in the span of about 26 hours.
Ooh.
And then, I don't know, kids are off the whole week. So, like,
that's the one, man. I think that's where the depletion, like you have no opportunity to recharge any batteries because you're like, oh, wait, I got to take care of like all of these kids for the entire week. Like, what?
I recharge my batteries during the middle of the week. I'm pretty good on like a Wednesday. That's when I'm at my peak. Everybody else is like, oh, I'm making it through the week. I'm like, let's do this thing, baby. Yeah, it's reversed. They don't tell you that. I'm like trying to keep track in the back of my mind of the kid advice that I think people should know, which is like the backwards stuff. Oh, by the way, you're never gonna have a weekend again. You're going to feel great on Wednesdays. You're going to feel like trash on Saturday and Sunday. They change like every 6 days. So just assume you're going to be screwing crap up the whole time. But people didn't come to hear me talk about my kids and like potty training. Or did they? They probably came for your fantasy takes. So, Dan, you've prepared 4 total, I think 2 buys, 2 sells for today. But as everybody knows, when I have guests on the show, I like to do as little as humanly possible. So where do you want to go first? I'm here to just put player pages up on the screen and play devil's advocate. That's my only job today.
Love it. All right. So let's start off with Paul George and why he's a sell high. It starts off with, he was sporting a pretty big knee brace, like very Joel Embiid-ish against the Charlotte Hornets. And despite that, he put together his best game, 29 points, 8 dimes, 6 threes. Like, that's exactly what you wanted from Paul George, of a guy that's really been struggling to start the season. Understandably so. He's coming off that bone bruise injury they suffered in the preseason, and then that kind of got re-injured. But I think he could be finding his stride enough that it could be enough for baiting a fantasy manager into getting, oh, is this Paul George, the guy that we expected to be like a 3rd or 4th round value? I don't know that I think he's going to be that over the course of the season. He's going to be better than he is. He's not going to shoot 40% for the season. And looking at his shot chart, he's actually missing a lot of shots in the paint, which typically he makes, not around the rim, but just like outside of the restricted area. So he'll be better, but I just don't trust this Sixers situation in the long run. I think there's more risk than reward here. We don't know when Joel Embiid is really going to be healthy enough to really help carry the workload here. And Tyrese Maxey can only do so much. Paul George is going to have to play a myriad of roles. So some days we'll see him be facilitating Paul. Some days we'll see him be aggressive Paul. I think that's all going to average out to be a player that is not going to exceed his ADP. And so I would take the advantage right now while Embiid's off the court. Watch him cook. He's probably going to have another good game against the Orlando Magic tonight. Sell high.
Okay, so this raises a really interesting question, because when you told me that it was going to be Paul George, I was like, well, he hasn't really been all that great so far this year. So this is that like weird, it's not a sell low because he did just have a good ball game. Right. But from a timing standpoint, again, talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Sports, at Dan Titus on social, DANTITUS, how do you piece this one together timing wise? Like after a big ball game, see what you can do. After a slow ball game, maybe pull stuff back and just like you kind of have to be on it all the time? Or is there some other path that you like to use? Because this is similar to what I've talked about with Jalen Duren, like wait for a big ball game and then abandon ship because it's not going to get great. And it sounds like you feel kind of similarly about PG.
Yeah, and I think that there was maybe certain fantasy managers that got Paul George weren't intending him to be, the second option in this offense anyway. Tobias Harris showed us what a Nick Nurse offense is, being the third option, but he's better than Tobias Harris. So while his numbers don't suggest like, oh, he looks like he could actually be a buy low, with just looking at his points per game. But the rebounds and assists look very good. And I don't think that that's going to change. I think that there's just going to be that window of opportunity of like, hey, Paul George is more of the 25-5 guy, not a 23-5 guy. So I think that this is an opportunity. You're going to see him put up some big games, 29 points. I mean, he's coming off this, 29-point performance. He could probably drop 25, 26 tonight. To me, everyone's going to think, oh, man, maybe he's turning the corner. If you think that he's turning the corner, use that as ammo to go get somebody else, which brings me to my buy, which would be Desmond Bane. And I think that those two players are like in the same range of, I think you could package Paul George and another player to get Desmond Bane, which would look kind of attractive if you're given a 2-for-1, even though Bane seems to be on the upward swing of that buy low window.
I'm going to throw Bane up on the screen in just a second here. On the PG side, would you consider, like, I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this question, because everything in trades is about trying to unload someone
value.
Yeah, and like cashing in at peak value and all that kind of stuff. So would you consider letting it ride, or does that run the risk of like, oh, Joel Embiid will be back on X day, and then people aren't going to want him as much at that point? How do you balance that side of the Paul George equation?
So if I do have Paul George and I'm actively trying to trade for Desmond Bane, so that's why I'm giving that suggestion. I think if you have Paul George, you can ride this out, because I would just, it's actually two sides to this, because I think if you're negotiating, you could be like, yo, look at Joel Embiid. This dude isn't coming back. Like, this situation's ugly. You're getting a number 2 option right now that's just starting to find his stride. On the flip side, I could be like, well, maybe I just hold Paul George because Joel Embiid looks super suspect and he's probably not going to have any consistent playing time this season. So Paul George could actually be okay. I just lean towards the first side of that, where it's like, hey, man, this Sixers situation just looks bad. The dude's gotten hurt twice already. He seems to not really have found that chemistry, or Nick Nurse hasn't found that right rotational connection yet to optimize everyone. And I think it's going to take a lot longer to build that. As a fantasy manager, I don't want to deal with the frustrations of it. So get out of it while you're ahead. And this guy puts together a handful of good games, and you could possibly sell him high off of that.
Well, you already told us where we're going next, so I guess we can get the jump on that.
Kind of looks like a mid-off, actually.
14-6-4. Yeah. But like this one, I think of the names that you had sent over, and I'm racking my brain for what I have and haven't talked about. Bane, I think, is the only one that I have talked about, and so you and I are in total agreement on this one. I can do a pretty good job of playing devil's advocate on some of the other ones, but not as much on Bane, who, like, what was he? He was ranked like 140th last week or something absurd. And you can always tell, and I know you're going to say something similar, so I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but you can always tell by looking at the way people are reacting on social media when you even mention something like this. Because I think I put out I'm buying on Desmond Bane right now, and someone was like, are you sure? Memphis is playing a lot of their guys 26 minutes. I'm like, yes, now I'm even more sure. Thank you for sealing the deal that I can go and get this guy. So walk me through the Desmond Bane arc, because it has been a little bit of a frustrating start.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's been dealing with an oblique injury, and the one thing that we've noticed out of the Memphis Grizzlies over the last couple of seasons is that they can't stay healthy for the long run. This is Ja Morant. This is Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. for a time, even Marcus Smart this season. So I think that the Grizzlies have been actually very methodical and smart about how they're managing their minutes of their players coming off of an injury. In November, Desmond Bane averaged 27 minutes a night. If you think that Desmond Bane's going to play 27 minutes a night for the rest of the season, you're crazy. And we're already starting to see that upswing in those minutes. He's played 31 minutes in each of the last 3 games on average. And you're starting to see that volume kind of come up and ramp up. Taylor Jenkins talked about it, I think, a week ago. It was like, hey, man, Desmond Bane's working through some rust. He's got to get his back into form. this is where we're starting to see that ramp up. And I don't know that the buy low window is completely shut yet, but I loved what Desmond Bane's been doing from a rebound perspective. He's at a career high. Their assist numbers are also good. I would have more confidence in banking on Desmond Bane to last out the rest of the season than Ja Morant. Now, Ja Morant is playing a lot smarter. He already admitted that he's not going to be going for these highlight viral dunks, but he still plays an aggressive style of basketball whenever he's downhill. Desmond Bane's not that guy. This guy is the second option on their offense. He hasn't even found his stride yet. The Memphis Grizzlies are still winning. This is a guy to me that's showing that he's just getting to the point where he's going to feel comfortable and get back to that 25-5 type of player that we've seen over the last several years. So I think this is a perfect time where you can say, hey, just look at his stats. He's averaging 15 points a game. You don't want this guy. Go get Desmond Bane.
What are you willing to give up to get him besides Paul George? Let's say it's not, you got a player in your hypothetical example so far. You've been more than willing to part with the dude you don't like very much. What about like what player of, I don't want to say a player of value, but just like if you were trying to sell someone else that didn't have all that baggage hanging over them, what kind of a range of guys would you be thinking about giving up? This, by the way, this would have been a much easier question like 4 days ago before he put up 2 big lines in a row. I was like, I think we could get him for like a top 80 guy earlier this week. It probably takes a little more than that now.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at like a Tyler Hero type, a guy that's playing outside of it. Like, I mean, he's playing well above expectation. He's pretty much carrying the Miami Heat right now. I would consider that. I was actually looking at, I think Bam Adebayo was one that I was like, if you don't love what he's doing, I actually feel like he might actually be a buy low or like on that. He's on that. He's not that bad, guys, and he's not going to shoot that poorly for us this season. So name notoriety, I think that probably fits. If someone's frustrated. I mean, I could go as high as maybe OG Anunoby because I think that he's a guy that is playing at a Kawhi Leonard type ceiling right now that there's going to be a point where this is either going to be Tom Thibodeau rearing his ugly head and, oh shit, you just broke OG. Not that I'm banking on someone getting hurt, but history tells us this guy hasn't been able to withstand his health for an entire season. And the way Josh Hart's playing, Mikal Bridges is finally starting to come alive a little bit. Something's got to give. So I think we've seen the best of OG Anunoby. Maybe this is a good time to buy low on Desmond Bane, sell high on him, a guy that's traditionally not been as good as he's been in multiple categories across fantasy.
Let me give you a quick lightning round. A couple of names versus Desmond Bane. Which of the two guys would you take in a trade? DeMar DeRozan.
Oh, that's a perfect. I think that's a really good one, actually. I don't know that, but I wonder what people think of DeMar DeRozan. Like, he's just that like top 50, 60 guy. But I'm like, is he like one of those names that you're like, you want to trade? Ooh, you sent me DeMar DeRozan. Ooh, I'm enticed now. I think he's in that like Tobias Harris. Like, you've kind of just exceeded your name value in trades, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, he's ranked higher. That's the thing.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of. Brandon Miller versus Desmond Bane. Who would you rather have there?
Ooh, Brandon Miller's cooking right now. But I also see the value in the trade in the sell high. That's a good one. I'd probably lean to keep. No, I think that's interesting. I think that's probably the extreme case. Like, Brandon Miller's a tough one, but I would consider that based on how I feel about Desmond Bane, who could be, a third, fourth round value player the rest of the season.
What about Siakam? Siakam or Bane?
Yeah, I don't love Siakam, so I would offer that up.
Jimmy Butler or Bane? Is that one easier than the last one? It might be.
Yeah, I think I would probably be easy. I was actually considering throwing Jimmy Butler in that hat too. Jimmy Butler is definitely a person that I would consider trading for Bane.
Last one. Jaylen Brown or Desmond Bane?
Ooh.
Yeah, because Brown has that like scores a lot value, but his percentage has been dookie so far this year.
They have. I think that one probably be a roster construction question. Like, if you're looking for more points, I think you take Bane. I think you take Jaylen Brown. But if you're looking for additional assists, threes, higher free throw percentage, I think you lean Bane there.
Dan, what are you working on these days? Again, talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Sports at Dan Titus on social. And also, where can people find you that I haven't already mentioned?
Yeah, at Dan Titus on Twitter and at Dan Titus on Blue Sky. Instagram, I think I have an underscore in there, but no, who talks fancy on Instagram? But yeah, I'm working on a bunch of stuff, man. Check me out on the Roto World Basketball Show every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Oh, is that the right time? 11 p.m. Pacific on Twitch. You can also catch that on everywhere you get your streaming podcasts and platforms. Also doing a bunch of content for Yahoo because I work for them. Playlist on Mondays, you can find all of my scheduling info and who I'm picking up for the rest of the week. And I'll be hopping on the Good Word with Goodwill podcast on Yahoo Sports every Wednesday, talking hoops, general hoops. I'll probably mix in some fantasy stuff with that, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, man, have the From Deep where I just go through 3 unique stats that I'm finding throughout fantasy basketball. And yeah, man, just trying to do it as much as I can to keep up with all of the stuff that we have to deal with in terms of injuries and trades. The deadline's coming up, which should be super interesting for a lot of fantasy implications on your teams. And I got like 15 fantasy basketball teams. So I live and breathe this just as much as you guys do. I'm in the trenches taking grenades just as much as you are. So I empathize with a lot of the questions that you have. Be patient. Not every trade is created equal, but we'll get there one way or another.
Yeah, a slight exasperation at the end of that one. Dan, where do you want to go next?
Let's go to why we should sell Brandon Ingram. I know another great name of someone that like, ooh, Brandon Ingram's in my inbox. I would love to take you up on that. But his numbers actually aren't that
those
bad.
Are good counting numbers.
His counting numbers are solid. I have the red flag in his turnovers. So I think that's really driving his value. Like he would be upwards in that fourth round value if you're playing in 8 cat leagues versus 9 cat, because he's averaging a career high 3.9 turnovers per game.
Oof.
Besides that, though, I think this goes deeper than fantasy. I'm selling him because I don't believe in all of the optics that are surrounding Brandon Ingram. Number one, this man ditched his representation and joined Clutch Sports. Mm-hmm. Usually that's a strong indication that you do not want to be where you're at. And you've already voiced the fact that you want to play with a contender. If they grant your wish and somehow you get to another situation and you're in a contending situation, no doubt Brandon Ingram's skill set, he's going to have to be deferring something. And right now, the value of Brandon Ingram is that he gets a good amount of assists for his position, decent rebounder, middling 6 rebounds a game is fine, but he's also a high volume shooter. He's scoring over 23 points per game. If there's going to be any kind of concession in that, he's not going to be as valuable for fantasy. So that's one reason why I don't like him. The other reason is because he's dealing with plantaris tendonitis. I don't know what that was, so I had to Google it. And it's pretty much a load-based impact, quick reaction type injury that seems to be something that only is managed with rest. It can take up to 8 weeks. He's already been out for quite some time. We know his storied injury past. I don't know if this is a guy that you can rely on for back-to-back sets. He could have some periodic rest. The Pelicans are not a good basketball team. They're finally getting all healthy, but this dude's coming off a 29-point performance, 7 rebounds, 3 assists with 2 stocks. I mean, this is one of those Paul George situations where I'm like, everybody's coming back a little bit. He's showing out looking really good. Use that as an opportunity to go get yourself another player that's more reliable, doesn't have as many injury concerns, and doesn't have that contract situation looming that's kind of impacting how much he could be preserving himself / potentially being traded down the line.
He's also a guy, and it strikes me as because he doesn't get that many defensive stats, there isn't quite the same buffer against a usage drop-off for him, where if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, you lose points, you lose threes, you lose assists. Typically, both percentages are good for him, so you don't want to downtick in that. I think field goal is a little bit lower this year.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think you could get back for Ingram right now? And maybe that is 8 or 9 cat dependent, because obviously if somebody's punting turnovers, I feel like you could get a decent return for him.
That's fair. Yeah. I think that depends on so if you have the Jordan Pooles of the world and you're punting field goal percentage and turnovers, Brandon Ingram probably is a really good fit for that. one of the players that I was looking for, I was actually looking like, I know Mikal Bridges has been a buy low for quite some time now. I have Bridges in quite a few spots, but I think he's a guy that's kind of seen his fantasy stock kind of rise lately. And I think that, right now Ingram is better than Mikal Bridges. I think Bridges is still in that 80, 90 range in 9-cat leagues, whereas Ingram's in that 70 range if you're playing 9-cat. So I think that they're pretty comparable players. And, ADP wise, Bridges was at least two rounds ahead of Ingram. So I think that's a player that I would think would be a reasonable trade because Bridges' numbers don't stand out particularly well. And I think you can get a little bit of that stock boost as well as threes by getting someone like Mikal Bridges. Trying to think of some other players that might fit the mold here, but I think Brandon Ingram.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Would you want Devin Vassell over Brandon Ingram? Or too many?
No, I don't know that I would trust Devin Vassell just because of there's the fact that he's coming off the bench that gives me actually a little bit more confidence that he's like, oh, let's not overwork him just yet. Like they're ramping him up. So I think this is actually a good time if you're interested in Devin Vassell to get into those sweepstakes. Especially with Wemby. Like I think they've been actually managing Wemby's workload pretty good here. So I think there's going to be a place where Devin Vassell is obviously going to be in the starting lineup. He's not there yet. So I think that opportunity alone presents some value for trading for him. I think I probably prefer, that's actually I think that's good. I think I've come around there. I think Devin Vassell is a fair get that's very attainable for where Brandon Ingram is at and where he's playing.
Brandon Ingram versus Kobe White is another one I'll throw at you.
I think that's actually pretty comparable. I'd probably just hold. I don't. Although there is
Kobe White on the hopes that like his teammates get traded away.
Yeah. If that's the case, then yeah, I think Kobe White would be the one you'd want to target there. It's just a matter of like, what are the Bulls going to do? Because they haven't really tipped their hand, and it's like Vucevic is playing at like he's turning back the hands of time here. And it's not like they're going to hold him. I think he's doing his best job to get it the hell out of there. It's like, how much better can I play, guys? Come on, come get me. But I think it'd be more so of Zach LaVine moving where I would be like, okay, Kobe White to the moon, type of situation.
You got one more in the tank, Dan Titus. Where are we going on the last one?
Ivica Zubac. He's been 147th over the last 2 weeks. Hasn't been scoring. He's been still shooting 60% from the field. The free throws though, 28%.
Oh,
I think that's like really been driving his. It's not on a lot of volume, but 28%. That's like Bo Outlaw. I mean, that's like
that's a great reference.
I'm just trying to figure like who was like really bad at free throws. Yeah, that's like beyond him. So
that's like that's like. That's like a guy who talks about basketball but can't play it very well. It's really, but like, is it going to get better? Because he's at 50 something for the year. I know personally, I did not draft him this year with this in mind. In the places where I have Zoo, I was like, all right, high 60s, maybe creeps into the low 70s like he did last year, and he's gone full punt free throw. Is your buy low built on a free throw comeback, or what's the thought process there?
Yeah, I think it's a free throw comeback. I think he's going to settle in somewhere in that 65-70 range, which is an improvement over the 50%. But this is more of a buy low in terms of just the ranking over the last couple of weeks. The scoring's been down. It's been 10 points, 11 rebounds. I think a fantasy manager might be like, oh, Zoo's not really that great, but I still feel like he does enough. Also, his block rate is down as well. I think this is an opportunity where you could buy him because he still has one of the best point guards in the league with him. That tie to James Harden is something that I was like super excited about. Matty G of Inside Sports was always talking about one of the things that I thought was kind of creative because we think about stacking in fantasy football terms. And I think it's actually a pretty cool idea with the right combination in basketball terms. And I tried to get James Harden and Ivica Zubac everywhere that I could just because I'm like, all right, these guys have that connection. The pick and roll is money with them. James Harden generally makes his centers better. So I think that I think he's kind of gone to the the floor of his value versus where we saw earlier in the season was closer to a ceiling. So I think that there's still some value to be gained here. I think you could probably trade a couple of middling back end depth guys to get Ivica Zubac. And that's one thing I've been trying to do in a lot of fantasy leagues is like, hey, I think this is going to be the lowest of the low for Zubac in terms of his fantasy ranking. Let's go get him.
One kind of macro question for you before we wrap things up. When you're looking to make a trade with another team, what does that process look like for you? Because I know like the biggest complaint I get when I do trade shows is my league doesn't trade. So how do you help listeners get over that hurdle?
Man, that is a real ass statement right there.
It's hard.
It's something that I wrestle with a lot because not only being in a lot of leagues, there's a lot of different personalities that go into that. And some, a lot of people are apprehensive on trading just because they're like in a standing position where they're like, I don't need to trade. Well, I'm good on waivers. Like my team is generally healthy. But I always try to sell it as, hey man, fantasy basketball is supposed to be fun. You look a little light on rebounds. Why not? Or, hey, man, you got a surplus. I'm just looking at the numbers here. You could use a couple more assists. What's it really going to hurt you? And by the way, I'm not asking for your best player. I like to work on the guys that are like, probably ranked 60 through 110, because I feel like those are the guys that people don't care about as much. People always have their affinity towards, oh, I'm not trading SGA. I'm not trading Tyrese Halliburton. I'm not trading. Go for those guys that like are the mid to like back end depth guys that you see value in that maybe you missed out in the draft. Zubac is one of those guys for me. And those are the guys that I'm like, you don't really care about this guy. Come on, let's make this work. And that's when I'm willing to give up more in terms of concessions, where I might have a waiver guy that's been playing really well that I can sell high on, like TJ McConnell. I think he's a guy that does have some rest of season value if Tyrese Halliburton continues this ridiculous home away split anomaly thing. But I think that there's a way to convince people, like, it's easier to come off of guys that you care about less than the ones that are like more highly valued and, probably anchoring your teams. Whereas there's other guys that, frankly, you could drop this guy if he was really that bad tomorrow.
Yeah, I would also argue, by the way, I love that point is spectacular, that like, don't go try to get somebody's top 20 dude because you're not going to get it. And also, like, you probably don't want to trade your top 20 guy because your team is likely built around whatever that guy is good at. Like, that's the roster construction you've got. That's why when I get these trades in the YouTube comments or whatever that are like, oh, I traded, my first, my third, and my fifth for their second, third, and fourth. And I'm like, you might have won that trade, but I don't know what the hell your team's going to look like right now, because it's like points leagues. Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter what categories they're good at, but like a 9-cat league, you have to match up with statistical team need stuff. And that's why the guys you're talking about, like a Zubac or an Ingram or whoever who's out there, where it's like, this isn't going to change your team dramatically. No. But if I'm thinking roto, like, and I'm light on rebounds, Zubac is a guy that gives you a firm kick in that category, but doesn't cost you a fortune. And you can give up somebody who's maybe good at 3-pointers or something you have a little bit of a surplus in. Because again, like, the way that you view players is often so different than the way that the person you're trading with is viewing them, but it's so much easier to bring those together on the guy ranked 95th than the guy ranked 5th. So I 100%. Love that point. That's a fantastic point, and that's a great starting spot, because everybody gets so frustrated when they can't do a blockbuster. Start small.
Yeah. I'll be honest, like, I'm trying to think about how many blockbusters I've actually executed over the years, and I feel like it's always the trade in the fringes. It's like those guys that, like, you don't really care about this guy. Let me go offer you something of value. If like, hey, maybe you're looking for a nice little wing to build out your small forward, power forward spot. Cool. Let me get this big. So yeah, I don't know. And it's also like just playing into people's egos a little bit, like make them feel nice. Like, I'm going to offer you a nice, shiny player, a guy that, like Brandon Ingram, like I don't really care about, that I'm like, yo, I'll take, yeah, you could Just give me Zubac. It's cool. Let's make that trade. It's
You're
fine.
so smart. What a great job you did drafting this player. But I'll gladly take them off here. Makes me think of that South. I'm not going to do it because it's a fairly racist episode. But it makes me think of a South Park episode where I think it's their Pokemon like spoof thing where the people at the company keep telling the American visitors how brilliant and smart they are in much more gross ways. And maybe that's the technique to use with somebody as you're like trying to get their fantasy player off.
Just hype them up, man. Hype them up, make them feel great for the decisions that they made, and you can make it even better if you do this move. Yeah.
This is how you get there. But yeah, I mean, like, and then we'll wrap this thing up. You're totally right. I don't have the time to propose a ton of trades like you. I'm in a lot of leagues, and you're doing a crap ton of content. I am as well. Again, talking to Dan Titus of Yahoo Sports at Dan Titus. But then one fell into my lap the other day that was like kind of even. Like you can make good trades that are evenly matched in value. You don't have to fleece somebody else to actually win a trade if it's good for your team. I traded away Michael Porter Jr. and I got Chris Paul. And a lot of people are gonna like, Dan, you lost that trade. Maybe.
Why?
But like
if
my
you need
team,
assists,
I felt really
if you need like
yeah, exactly. Anyway,
that's a great point, but that's a great trade because I'm like, who wouldn't want to like Michael Porter Jr. is never untouchable. So
it's true.
I think that's probably the best way I'd frame it. Don't go for the untouchables. Go for the, oh, hell yeah. Like,
sure.
Michael Porter, sure, fine.
If this one explodes in my face, I don't even care. Like, I'll be fine. I lost some 3-pointers and like he's relatively efficient shooting, but his free throws have been super weird and like it'll be okay. I'm not going to find an MPJ on the waiver wire, but my team will survive this, even if I got nothing out of Chris Paul. But my expectation is not a lot of scoring, some assists, some steals. That was what my team was weak in. Boom. It's great. I basically exchanged evenly matched players, and the ROI was good. Probably for both teams. I don't know what that other dude needed.
That's a good trade. That's a very fair trade.
Anyway, Dan, you're the best, dude. We could do this for an hour, and I'm not going to let that happen because I also know that you're extraordinarily busy.
Come on, let's go enjoy life. Oh wait, our kids are coming home like in
an hour. To say, my nanny's out of town until next Saturday, so
oh man.
Oh no. If you want, what did you say about recharging the batteries earlier? Not anytime soon.
We're done.
Anytime soon. Dan, thanks so much, dude. Let's do this again as soon as I can come up with a really good topic to do it on. How about that?
Sounds great, brother.
Talking to Dan is the absolute damn best. I say this every time, but I gotta do a better job of getting guests on this show, and Dan is very much one of them. You can just tell, and this is the case for pretty much all the guests we have on this show, but you can just tell when folks just sit and stare at fantasy basketball all the time. And Titus is one of those guys. Again, you can find him on Twitter and Blue Sky at Dan Titus. Much easier last name to spell than my own. Titus. Coming up on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, nothing. The rest of today. This is your special Saturday edition of the show, after all. We'll have a weird weekly preview show coming up for the Goofball Week 8, which is highlighted by, I think, a grand total of like 25 games. Yeah, over the entire week. And the funny thing is, Week 9, where there are literally 2 days of no games that count, has like 35. So Week 8 is super screwy. In Yahoo, it combines with Week 7. And like, there's this argument of should it have combined with Week 9? I mean, ultimately, what probably should have happened is that Week 7 should probably have gone all the way up to Friday of next week. And then Saturday and Sunday probably should have glommed onto the next one. So basically, like, split Week 8 into the front 5, which is 15 or 16 games, and the back 2, which is 9 games, and then just push those apart. Or you just treat it as its own very weird little week. So it's going to play a lot like opening week if you're on a website where Week 8 is its own thing. In any event, we're going to take a look at that. There's a 1, a 2, a 2, and a 3 to start the week. There's another 2 on Saturday. The 1 should have almost been a day off. And then Tuesday, Wednesday of next week is NBA Cup days. Saturday is also an NBA Cup day. Thursday, Friday, and Sunday are what you'd call like regular days. And so you're basically hunting, are there any teams that have a noted, like a market better schedule next week? And frankly, the only one is New York. The Knicks have an extra game. I don't fully understand how that happened, but it did. So that's your sort of winning ticket. Or you sort of eyeball, like, could I get NBA Cup teams at the front of the week and then non-NBA Cup teams towards the end of the week? We also don't know who's playing who on Saturday and Sunday. You'll have the teams that advance, and then you'll have the ones that won't. They'll sort of drop back into the main pool. We'll talk about all of that in our weekly preview show, which will stretch into the beginning of week 9. If, again, you're kind of looking ahead to that Monday, because, I mean, bleep it, you might as well, right? Like, you're making moves effectively for a couple of days. But these are going to be really important streaming decisions because you've got a team like New York that goes twice at the beginning of the week and then once at the end. You've got Toronto that goes twice relatively early in the week. But then you also have teams that go Friday, Sunday. So you might be able to sort of pair up like a team that goes 2 with a team that goes 0. All stuff you don't have to think about right in this moment, but you will soon. Thanks again to Dan Titus for today's special Saturday buy low, sell high edition of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Find me on social media at Dan Vespers on Twitter, Old Man Squad on Blue Sky, Old Man Squad Fantasy over on Instagram. Hit that like button on your way out. Subscribe before you do anything else the rest of your day, and drop that 5-star review, and we will see you mañana. So long, everybody.